hopefully not. If it's the most stressful thing, I've done something tragically wrong.
Wow.
Well, let's hope that that's not the case. I believe in you.
So you guys heard about the Endurance, right? Did you guys see the footage? Just a perfect timing to talk about Antarctica. And we also heard that we're recording Ben, because this is going to be somebody else will want to see this seminar. So please watch out with your comments. You can be deliberate. Anyway, it's exciting today to have another of our OSC students present your journey in Antarctica and your research, maybe. So Ben, I think you don't need any introduction in this group. So please take it away and show us what you got.
Sure thing. All right. There we go. Everyone see that?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so and most of you know me. I'm Ben Hurwitz. I'm a, I guess, 5th year PhD candidate in the OSC program. And I work primarily on underwater instruments. In particular, I'm interested in microfabrication of instruments and sensors. I'm not really going to be talking a lot about that today, if at all. Mostly what I'm going to be talking today about is our work, my lab's work in Antarctica and the 3 seasons that I've spent there. And my goal today is kind of to show everyone, kind of walk you through an entire field season. So basically you'll be going on a field season with me during this talk. That's kind of the idea. So let me make sure, there we go. So kind of without further ado, learning to deal with the unexpected fieldwork in Antarctica, 3 seasons in the field with me. And so I'll just start by briefly introducing our lab, the Planetary Habitability and Technology Lab. We're interested in environments, in looking at icy environments to investigate how and why they're habitable and what sorts of devices are useful in determining what they're inhabited by and how to best to translate that understanding to other planetary bodies such as Europa or Ceres or Enceladus. Most of our work has been using an icewind vehicle to look at under ice ocean environments, which also helps to inform climate science. So a lot of this talk will be primarily devoted to icewind deployments and kind of what that looks like. So this is the icewind vehicle, or it's one of them. There are a couple. They're 3.5 meter long, 125 kilogram pencil shaped hybrid underwater vehicles, which means that they can both be used in manual and autonomous modes. On the left-hand side of this image is the nose. That consists of cameras, lights, sonar, dissolved oxygen, CTD. These are instruments that really need a clean water column or for avoidance, so we don't run into anything, because believe it or not, there are obstacles under the ice. And then behind that, we have a science bay. It's we can swap it out. It's a modular bay. So that can house a couple of different instruments, pretty much any kind of custom instrument that you'd like, as well as a number of other things. So we currently have a multi-beam sonar that we can swap in there. We have a side scan sonar, as well as some chemical and biological sensors. We also have custom instruments been developed for it as well. So that's pretty flexible. In the middle, we have this big black thing. That's going to be the main electronics. It houses all the batteries, the main computer, and a couple of other power distribution, things like that. And then behind that, we have all of our navigational sensors. Make sure our tilt and roll, as well as how deep we are and how fast we're going. And there's also an ADCP on there for some current measurements as well. So this is a vehicle that we primarily deploy through the ice. So yeah, let's talk about kind of what a field season actually looks like. So field seasons, preparation for field seasons typically begin months before we actually go down to the field. In fact, they typically begin right after we get back from a previous field season. So as soon as we get back, we take about 2 weeks off, and then we start preparing for the next one. There's so much paperwork and testing and redesign and redevelopment that needs to be done that we really can't take a huge amount of time off. So you're constantly preparing for the next season when you're talking about Antarctica. This image in particular is actually the very first icewind vehicle being tested for the very first time at Georgia Tech's swimming pool. It worked beautifully. It was really quite, we were all pretty amazed, but it worked really well. So that was a really encouraging sign. We also test at the Acoustic Tank at Georgia Tech. This is kind of a big open tank that has really nice acoustic properties. We mostly test for ballasting in this tank. And then, next slide, there it is. We also tested the Atlanta Yacht Club as well as Kraken Springs, which is an old quarry in North Georgia. And you can see here that it's a really terrible place to test. They're really awful, but the whole vehicle kind of slides in really nicely, and we can do some surface testing here. It's actually really interesting to test here because during the summer months, it's so hot that the vehicle actually has a tendency to overheat if it's on the surface, which is why we have this big tent over it to keep it in the shade. We also practice for any other measurements that we're going to be taking while we're down there. So here we have Andy, one of our technicians, the postdoc in our lab. Learning how to do a water sample, properly filter water samples for DNA, which we did a whole bunch of this year. So once we've kind of done all of our testing and we're ready to go, we start to pack. There's so much packing to be done. Everything gets boxes and foams and multiple letters in case the TSA decides to start opening things and moving things around. The pink stuff on the right is electrostatic discharge safe foam or wrap, but it also gets foam. And so everything gets its own little nice box. And these are all of the boxes in our hallway before we bring them all to the airport. I'm sure Delta as a company really loves us because we pay a huge amount of baggage fees, but the person at the counter maybe less so. We use, this season or 2019, we used 5 full carts of boxes. It's a pain getting them anywhere, in particular getting them through all of the customs and immigration as well. But New Zealand is very, they know us at this point. So they're very tolerant of us as well, which is nice. So the trip actually starts at the Ford building here at Georgia Tech. This is where we pack all of our stuff into various cars, trucks, and lifts. And then we go straight to the Atlanta airport, from where we fly across the country to one of the West Coast gate cities, either LA or San Francisco. Usually there's a brief layover there in which we typically get ramen actually. Before the long cross-Pacific flight all the way to Australia. And we always go, there's no direct flight into Christchurch, so we always go to Australia, Sydney or Brisbane first before a quick hop, about 2-hour flight over the Tasman Sea to Christchurch. Christchurch is the gateway, is also known as the gateway to Antarctica. Beautiful city if you've never been, it's right on the coast, quite lovely in the South Island. So the first stop is always the Antarctic Center. It's where we drop off all of our boxes, and it's kind of where USAP, the U.S. Antarctic Program, has its headquarters here. It also houses the CDC, or the Clothing Distribution Center, where they have all of the kit, various jackets, bags, underwear, fleeces, hats, mittens, the whole 9 yards. We'll get size for this while we're over the few days that we're in Christchurch. Whoops, too fast. And then we go basically straight to the hotel, which we affectionately call the space prison because it has it's these tiny windowless rooms. You can see this is the entirety of it, and that back wall is actually a mirror, which makes it look bigger, but I promise you it's very tiny. So we're in Christchurch for a few days, so we typically have some meetings over food and coffee. Christchurch got hit by an earthquake in 2011, but it's been regrowing in popularity, and it's got a really wild street art scene, which I'm showing here, as well as a really solid food and coffee scene as well. So it's not so bad to hang out there for a couple of days. In 2018, they actually got stranded there for more than 2 weeks, which was kind of bordering on a little bit too long, but for a couple of days, it's definitely a fun place to be. This year was a little bit different, obviously, with the pandemic. So traveling international was an interesting experience. This is actually Singapore Airport, where we flew through this year due to routing problems. This entire airport was basically completely empty. And this is the small little area that we had to spend the 16-hour layover that we had at Singapore in. We couldn't leave this little tiny area. It was a long 16 hours. And the food options were very limited, to say the least. The flight to Singapore, from Singapore to Christchurch, was basically empty. There were probably more flight attendants on that flight than there were actual people, and it was like a whole big plane as well. So it was actually really nice to get very personal service. And then once we got to New Zealand, we had to go through, the New Zealand airport was also completely empty. We had to stay separated the whole time. They were very serious about it. And then we went straight into what they affectionately call managed isolation and quarantine, or MIQ. Basically, we got stuck in a hotel room for 2 weeks and couldn't leave. The only place, so my hotel room conveniently had a little bit of a window, and you can see people walking around there, and that's the designated exercise area. You could walk in a little tiny loop, which was probably about 500 meters, and you could do that for as many times as you wanted within about 45-minute periods. Unfortunately, you couldn't run or skip or be close to people. You had to like stay distant, and there were military people in uniform who were actually kind of enforcing those rules. So it was very, very strict. And the food was not the best food I've ever eaten in my life. It wasn't the worst food by any means, but it was definitely meager. So there was that. But when we finally escaped after 2 weeks, it was really excellent. But then we went immediately into another isolation facility, which had rooms that were even smaller. I had to set up a lab in my room to do some work. So that was fun. But the drive through from Christchurch to Methven was really quite lovely. This is a highlight of being in New Zealand, is just the scenery. And of course, there are sheep, many, many sheep. And my view from my room was actually really quite lovely as well, so I can't really complain. And we finally actually got to eat outside, which was great. These are the little things that you come to appreciate when you're stuck in a hotel room for 2 weeks. Really quite nice. More sheep. So finally, we were done with Methven. So we did 2 weeks in MIQ, and then we did 10 days in Methven for a total of almost a month of quarantine before we actually were managed to get down to the field this year. And so in the morning of your ice flight, which is what they call the flight down from Christchurch, you go to the Antarctic passenger terminal, and then you wait for a while, and you check in. There's like a whole standard check-in process. You get a boarding pass, you have to show them your passport, the whole 9 yards. Because you're technically leaving Christchurch and going to America, which is kind of bizarre. So we get a little safety briefing as well, which is always entertaining. And then we get on one of 2 different plane options. So this is the back end of a C-17. This is kind of the typical option that we get. It's just a giant military transport. There are a couple of different, they're so big actually that they have different internal kind of structures and layouts, and kind of what you get inside of it is a crapshoot. So in 2017, we just had people, so it's just packed full of people, and it's this huge plane. It holds an entire 747 body in it. It's really massive. But this year we actually had a helicopter in ours, so that was kind of cool. So you get a whole bunch of different stuff going on. And in 2018, I think they just had big cargo containers as well. So you get a whole bunch of stuff. One of the downsides of this is that you only had a tiny little window to see out of. This little tiny porthole, very small. But you do get some really sweet shots of Antarctica as you're kind of coming over it if no one else wants the porthole. So you get really cool images of the ice here and of some of the mountains in the background. If you're really lucky, though, you don't get a C-17. You actually get a seat on the Royal New Zealand Air Force 757. So we got lucky. Andy, I, and Enrica got lucky in 2019 and got to fly on this. And this is literally just a passenger jet that flies down there once a season. And what's nice about this is that all the seats have windows, so everyone gets to see out and see everything the whole way instead of just a small segment of it. So you get these incredible shots of Antarctica as you approach it and as you get over it. Really, really impressive views. And you also get these really beautiful images of McMurdo. So this is McMurdo. I'll be talking plenty about this in the coming slides. But McMurdo is the primary station primary U.S. station in Antarctica, and is one of the main stopovers and staging grounds for any of the other field work that gets done through the U.S. program. So where are we talking about here? So Christchurch, Atlanta is way off. So that's South America off to the right there. And then Christchurch and Australia and New Zealand are off to the left. And so that's about a 5-hour flight down from Christchurch, labeled in the top left there, down to McMurdo and Scott Base. I've also highlighted McMurdo is the US base there, and Scott Base is the Kiwi, the New Zealand base there. And Scott Base is right over the hill. It's like 1.5 kilometers away from McMurdo. So they're usually kind of talked about together. And I've been deployed at both. And so you'll be seeing kind of both today through this presentation. I'm also highlighting on this map 2 of our deep field sites, the KISS camp, KISS 2 camp, which is very close to the KISS 1 camp, which we also deployed at. and the Thwaites Cavity Camp, which is where the melt team with the International Thwaites Glacier Collaboration went in 2019 as well. I'm only going to be talking about KISS today because that was the only place I went. But let's start with McMurdo. So this is start of McMurdo Station. So McMurdo is kind of like an old mining town maybe, or like a kind of a bit of a rundown ski town. I'm not really sure I would call it pretty exactly, but it definitely has its charms. I mean, not least of which is all of the scenery around it. But this is kind of some shots of what McMurdo actually looks like. So this is the medical building on the right there. This is just some lovely piping, which is everywhere in McMurdo. Lots and lots of pipes moving water around and whatnot. The blue building in the back is 155. That's kind of the main mess area, as well as like a big dorm. It also has the gym in it, 2 gym spaces, the post office, not the post office, the where you can get like trinkets and things. And these are a couple vehicles in the front. We also have, there's a chapel there as well, which is situated beautifully right on the edge of station. So you can get these incredible shots with, always have the chapel. And it's technically non-denominational. And yes, people have gotten married in this chapel. And yes, it does count legally, although I don't know what state they put it on there technically. So interesting question. And this big hill is called Observation Hill. It's one of the highest points nearby that you can get some really impressive views of McMurdo from. And actually one of the earlier photos was from the top there. There we go. And more of kind of, this is McMurdo Sound. So this is what this is actually all sea ice out here. And in the far mountain and all the way in the back is called Mount Discovery. And this is where we would get off of the continent and go right out onto the sea ice. You can see all the little dots in the front. Those are all flags. We live in dorms. So on the left is a dorm building, is actually our dorm building. And on the right is my dorm room one year. You get 2 separate beds, single beds with your own bureaus and blackout. There's a whole like, piece of wood there that's used for maintain warmth and also blocks the room out. And we share, or this room shared a bathroom with another double like this. So it's our own kind of four person shared bathroom. And yes, there is hot water as well. McMurdo has a very strong kind of drive towards science and towards kind of explaining the science that people are doing down there. So there are science talks given twice a week, sometimes in the mess hall, which is where this one is, about emperor penguins in this case. And this one is in the Crary Library, which is, the Crary is the science building and the library is on the top floor. And so Brittany here is giving a talk about IceFin and kind of what the work we did that year. And we also do lab tours as well. So the general community, because the base is actually between 1,000 and 1,400 people in the high season, and so more than 2/3 of that is actually contractors, and the contractors really don't necessarily have direct interaction with any of the quote scientists who are doing science or whatever we're doing on station. So they really like the opportunity to come down and experience kind of and see and understand and hear what they're supporting while they're down there, which is really an important motivator for a lot of them. But McMurdo has a lot of kind of non-science things as well. They have a really huge music scene, actually. So this is the band room where anyone can go and play pretty much whatever instrument is here and available. I really prefer the trombone myself. And then there's a big kind of party scene at McMurdo as well. But these are all bands that have been made in McMurdo, and they've only practiced together for a month or 2 at most by the time they actually perform, and most of them are awesome. Here's another one as well. And then one of our personal favorites. These are the monotones. They sing a couple songs in a complete monotone. It's quite hilarious, actually, but it's very McMurdo. And this was actually at Ice Stock. Ice Stock is the New Year's Eve celebration that happens every single year. They do a 9-hour-long concert with all of the bands that have been existed throughout the season. Really, really fun. Another unique thing about McMurdo is Antarctica is all of the vehicles that exist there. So trucks with these weird tracks on them as well. They're called Mack tracks. Apparently they don't steer very well, but they're got pretty good grip. The piston bully, There it is. The piston bully here is the kind of workhorse for a lot of the science teams out of McMurdo. It's a small tracked vehicle. Goes about 8 miles an hour if you're really, really lucky. And it's a pretty bumpy ride without any real suspension, but it's got charm and character to it. Primarily piston bullies are actually, and in green here, this is the Scott Base one, but primarily piston bullies are actually used around the US as grooming for ski resorts. So they get a lot of operators for people who have that. They're also, wow, I'm totally blanking on the name of this right now. That's awkward. There are also these vehicles as well. They're basically like two piston bullies back to back. They've got a big cab in the back for that can fit almost 8 people. Pretty nice. These are very common for New Zealand. Really likes these. Are also amphibious, which is kind of cool. And then they have a whole bunch of giant vehicles. The Delta on the right is the kind of a big truck thing, and on the left we have Ivan the Terror Bus, which is kind of a famous McMurdo icon, which is basically just a big bus. They're really fun to kind of play around in. Nobody plays in them. There's also bulldozers for hauling out big heavy things out onto the ice. The sea ice gets to be about 3 to 4 meters thick, which is plenty thick enough to carry these big heavy vehicles as well. And finally, some of the biggest vehicles, this is the Crest vehicle. It's kind of like a bus as well, but it can do a lot of other things, but you can see kind of a size comparison to that gentleman over there. And then this one I find fun. This is a fire truck. Also tracked vehicle. Fire is actually a huge concern down there because the air is so dry. It's so dry that sparks catch really, really fast. So it's really critical that there's a good fire team and fire preparedness. McMurdo has a dedicated fire unit, actually. It's, I don't know how many people it is, but it's like a dedicated job. At Scott Base, they actually, it's much smaller. So they actually separate into 3 or 4 teams, and each week is a different team to be on fire duty. And we'll talk about that later. The food ranges, this is McMurdo food. This doesn't look that awesome necessarily. It probably was tasty, but there's definitely more variety. So you can see this is a different day, for instance. We do get freshies. There are fresh vegetables on there, as well as a lot of home cooked meals. There's also basically an unlimited amount of food. Clementines here as well. But there's basically an unlimited amount of foods. There's buffet style here on the left, which is pretty much the entirety of our food options. There's there's an egg counter, which makes eggs to go. And on the right, we have our 24-hour pizza station, which is currently empty. I apparently didn't take a photo of it when it was not empty. But that used to be 24 hours, but apparently this year with cutbacks and with COVID, they couldn't do that. So it's a little bit more limited, but normally it's 24-hour pizza you can get all the time, and you can ask for whole pies and stuff. It was really critical, clutch in the field actually, when we were out working and someone would come in and get a couple of pies and bring them out to us for dinner, which was really nice. They go all out for holidays as well. So this is us at Thanksgiving one year in 2018. Really just a hysterical amount of food, more than anyone could eat, and years and years and years of it stocked away. And for Christmas, they almost always break out the crab legs and lobster tails. I don't really understand where they're hiding those, but they do have them every single year. It's pretty remarkable. And they're also very serious about their gingerbread game. They have a whole gingerbread competition every single year as well. So this is obviously from Star Trek, the USS Enterprise, and then in the back you have a piston bully, and on the left you have a big Scott tent, which is kind of fun. So transferring a little bit over to Scott Base now, you can see Scott Base is highlighted on the right. The relative size, Scott Base is quite a bit smaller. So you're going to have about 45 to 50 staff members throughout the entire year, whereas again, McMurdo had close to 1,000. So it's a really, really stark difference. And there's just a very, very different feel, very different culture to both of the bases. But that distance is about 1.5 kilometers, and you can actually walk it in about half an hour. So it's a really easy to jump back and forth on a normal year between the two bases if you'd like to check it out. This is a Scott Base sign. So Scott Base looks like this. It's all green, and unlike McMurdo, which is discrete buildings, Scott Base is mostly all one large building, which you can walk to and from without ever leaving, which is really great because the location that it's at, which is this point right here, because Scott Base is right on the edge of that point, is way more exposed than McMurdo is. So it gets a lot more aggressive wind, and it gets a lot colder in the day and during the winters as well. So it's really important that they're completely enclosed. This picture is actually kind of cool because you can see there's a ridge. You can see this ridge that's running across on the ice. That ridge is actually the edge of the ice shelf. So that's on the right-hand side is sea ice, and on the left-hand side is ice shelf, the Ross ice shelf in particular. So more Scott Base. They have these also more unusual vehicles, all green. Everything is green. I'm not really entirely sure why, but it's all green. This is the only photo I have of inside Scott Base, apparently. It's got all of these orange things, and Scott Base is very well known for shocking everybody when you walk in it. You build up static electricity like nobody's business. So there are these metal strips that are line the base that you have to touch as you're walking. Otherwise, you get really badly shocked at some point. It's really quite funny. And this is a piece of stained glass that someone made. I never actually asked who made it, but it's been there for a really long time, and it's really quite lovely. They do have a bar. McMurdo had 2 bars plus a kind of coffee house, which has wine as well. And it's a really big player in the social scene. The bar here is much more of a casual hangout spot. There is a small bar and they do serve drinks, but it is a little bit more casual for sure. They also have a climbing wall, and they have pictures. One of the things I really like about Scott Base is they have all these pictures up from historical pictures from their various years and various travels, adventures. So this was a dog, a husky puppy from one of their various adventures, one of their various treks and field campaigns. There we go. So what I want. This is the mess hall. Scott Base obviously has to feed a lot fewer people, so their mess hall is very contained, and so everybody's always hanging out together, which is really quite nice. It makes a very strong familial family sense of family there. And the food is amazing. They do 5 meals a day there, 5 dedicated meals. So McMurdo, you can basically eat whenever you want. Scott Base, they have dedicated times, but they have 5 of them. So they have breakfast, they have morning tea, then they have lunch, then they have afternoon tea, and then they have dinner. And the morning and afternoon tea, the morning tea, they always do a savory thing. So this is cheddar and jalapeno biscuits, or I can't see what the other one is actually. But they have different kinds of biscuits and scones. And for afternoon tea, they always have something sweet. So cookies or pastries of various types. And they were fantastic, just really excellent. The food was another level there. Really nice. Scott Base is really different as well from McMurdo, is that they allow and actually encourage all of their staff to get out onto the ice, onto the sea ice, get off of base and really experience Antarctica. McMurdo doesn't do that. You really can't get off station very much. You can do some small hikes and whatnot, but you really can't get off of station. This picture shows a staff member actually, I think it's called parasailing. I'm not actually sure. They have that big kite and she's actually on a snowboard. And so she's taking the kiteboarding, that's what it's called. She's kiteboarding around on the sea ice, which was pretty awesome. And someone actually bought something called a wing as well. And so he put on skis and used this to kind of go around the sea ice as well, which was pretty cool. They also run FAM trips, which are trips that are guided by experienced guides. So in one of them, they actually took us down a crevasse. So that's the hole on the left, and then kind of going down this giant crevasse, which got really narrow, so narrow that I couldn't walk straight. I had to actually turn to do it. It was pretty cool. But that crevasse they've been paying attention to for literal decades now, and it basically hasn't moved at all. So it's a very safe location, but it is a really cool experience that you wouldn't really get anywhere else. There's also a ski field. I got to do some snowboarding for the first time in a while, which was awesome. Really nice, beautiful snow. This was a particularly nice day as well to do it. They made a curling rink while I was there and made curling stones out of pots of water. They just filled them and let them freeze and then put ice screws in them. They slid around. So that was a lot of fun. And they also do an event called the man hauling event. Teams of 5 drag a sled. 4 of them run and 1 of them is being dragged, and then partway through they rotate. So each person gets on the sled and they have to run. It's a 15-kilometer run. And the Kiwis actually won this year. They apparently do every year. So this is them in their winning, crossing the finish line. But what's really one of the really cool things about Scott Base, not all of this sounds fun, is the pressure ridges that are right outside. So the Ross Ice Shelf runs into the sea ice, which runs right into the continent and causes these upwelling of ice. This ice to just jut up like this, and they're called pressure ridges. And it makes these crazy formations. And this year we actually got really lucky because one of our sites was right on the other side of these pressure ridges. So we got to cross these every single day, which was really cool. But really neat is all of the seals. So seals love the pressure ridges. They love them because they're natural breaks in the ice for them to just jump into the water and swim around if they want to. Enrique here was really excited, but they are everywhere. And as the sea ice gets thinner over the course of the season and starts to break out more from the ice edge, the seals that were living out there slowly migrate all the way back here. And so by the end of the season, by the time I left, there were hundreds of seals out here. It was really quite remarkable. And we get to see seals in all their different life stages, because when you get down there, it's pupping season. So this is like a newborn pup, probably weeks old, frankly. And then you get to see them all the way. They grow a little bit more, get a little bit fatter, a little less bulky. Personally, I love the seals. I think they're extremely charismatic, super fun. But we really got to walk. I mean, this is how close. This is Dan walking back from one of our field sites. And you could see he was probably 5 or 6 meters away from that seal, no more than that. And they're so used to our presence that they don't even roll over anymore. Really remarkable. And as a random note, this year was really unique because there was actually a solar eclipse this year. Or maybe it was a lunar eclipse, now I'm forgetting. There was an eclipse this year. And so we got to see that in Antarctica, which is pretty unusual, pretty rare. And if you've never used a colander to actually show all of the eclipses in the holes, like we did on the right there, I highly recommend it next time you see an eclipse. Really neat effect. So now I'm going to talk about some of our near field work. So that's work that's undertaken close to Scott Base or close to McMurdo in this like regional area here. And these are a couple of, in yellow, I've highlighted a couple of the different sites. I'm not going to talk about each of them specifically, but these are a couple of different sites that we've surveyed as well as done some work at, various bits of work at. The labs that we operate out of are on the bottom floor of, or at McMurdo are on the bottom floor of Crary. And so this is the aquarium lab. There's all of this this wet lab work being done there, which is kind of weird that we would have an electronics project there, but that's the biggest lab. And the lab is huge. It's quite large actually. We get it all to ourselves, which is really nice because we do take up all of the space that they give us. But for being in the bottom, we do get an excellent view of the sea ice and some lovely images early in the season as the sun is still setting. Scott Base also gives us a huge lab, and it is much more modern. The building, Scott Base, the building that the labs are in, or the part of the building the labs are in, is quite new. So you get all of this new stuff, but they're actually planning on tearing the whole thing down over the next 5 years and building a new one instead. So we'll see how that works. But this was also a really excellent space to work in. We really do expand if given the option. This is a fish hut. Fish huts are these structures that they drag out for us onto the sea ice to a specific place where we can kind of deploy out of. You can see the bulldozer there. It actually dragged it out, and it's pushing snow up against the bottom so that the bottom stays warm and keeps the hole they drilled underneath it. They drill this meter diameter hole underneath it for deployments. You can also deploy instruments and things through it, but they want to keep that from refreezing, so they pile snow up against the sides to keep the wind from cutting through it. We usually use a piston bully, and we can fit pretty much everything in Iceman into a piston bully. And this is Brittany in our piston bully in 2017 with the entire vehicle that we had. But the fish huts aren't really that large. They're like just large enough for the vehicle to sit in pretty much. And deploying it is not super graceful all the time, as you might be able to tell from these pictures. It's kind of a whole little angular geometry problem that kind of requires some shifting and moving and some strong people to carry a 250-pound vehicle for a brief period of time. But, and there's also tether operations. The tether management of a project like this is huge. On the left is Brittany and Josh actually dealing with the tether in some pretty gnarly looking conditions. And on the right, we have Justin doing figure eights to lay out some additional tether, because you don't really want the vehicle being carried on the tether directly. You really want some extra leash there just to maintain, to keep the tether from pulling in, tether wraps from pulling in on the winch. And this is what the operations looks like from the inside. We use a couple of different laptops as well as some external screens to really give us all the information that we need. And frankly, we don't want to expand it anymore, but it's still a little bit cramped. It's still definitely a little bit cramped. And sea ice operations with the fish hut are where we primarily see penguins. So this is the best picture I have of a pair of Adelie penguins that decided to visit us one day. Very, very silly animals. They must have thought we were penguins because they ran up to us, and then they realized we weren't penguins, and then they just kind of slowly waddled away, just like got disinterested. There's no predators above the ice in Antarctica, so they don't have a fear response above the ice typically. So they're not like afraid of you. They just don't, they know you're not a penguin, but they don't understand what you are. So from that sense, things don't really walk away from you or run away from you if you walk up to them. But as part of the Antarctic Treaty, you're not supposed to interact with any of the animals. So you just kind of let them do their thing. If we're not using the fish hut, or sorry, in 2019, we actually discovered, or we built this big A-frame instead. So we didn't have to deploy directly through that hole in the fish hut anymore, because that was unpleasant a lot of times. So this is what the A-frame looks like outside of our fish hut. And we use this large drill called a Jiffy drill, which has meter-long flights. Each of those black things is a flight, it's a meter long, and you can attach them one at a time to make a hole 10 centimeters in diameter. And conveniently, Iceland is just under 10 inches in diameter. And conveniently, Iceland is just under 10 inches in diameter, so it fits nicely into that hole. And so what it kind of looks like actually to raise the vehicle using this A-frame is that we use a system of pulleys. And the whole thing, and this long thing that Iceland is sitting on is called the Strongback. And this is kind of reminiscent actually of how rockets get raised and lowered. NASA rockets or any kind of rocket get raised and lowered as well. They sit on this long hard thing and the whole thing gets stood up. And then from here, we would lower the Strongback and then lower the whole thing through the hole. This is another setup of ours at Erebus Glacier Tongue. We actually ditched the fish hut entirely here for a big yellow tent, which you can kind of see in the background. That's called an Arctic oven. This is the other side of it. I really appreciate Dan's smile in this photo, frankly, on the right. I assume this was one of his images. And this is what it looks like from the inside. Same kind of multi-monitor setup. This is Brittany, Chad, and Dan kind of operating the vehicle from the inside with a set of blackout curtains on the left, excuse me. You really need those blackout curtains, otherwise the glare on the monitors is way too strong. So really critical to have them. But even after a long day, it's not so bad because you get this beautiful ride on the snow machine back into town with Erebus in the background often, or McMurdo and the sun shining. It's really can be quite dramatic and quite lovely. This season, we actually had a really unique opportunity. We didn't deploy through fish huts or through a tent. We actually deployed through containers. And these are standard shipping containers that Antarctica, New Zealand, ANZ got probably 2 decades ago for really, really cheap. And they converted them all into various science containers. So there's living quarters, there's a kitchen, there are three different science containers, there's a generator container, and then there was an extra one for us as well. So we got to work out of these containers this season, which was really excellent. Frankly, having the container there was really nice. It's basically like having a fish hut, but it's bigger and you don't have to deploy directly in it. So that was nice. And yeah, another view of them from the other side. This was our container. It had nice little glass doors on the front, which was really quite nice. And this is what operations look like on the inside. Again, this is the same multi-monitor setup. We just get kind of shoved into the back of this container here instead. More images of Iceland being up in the Lars. And you can see some tents out there. Some people decided that they would prefer to sleep in tents rather than sleep indoors. It was really cold the couple weeks we were here, like -20 Celsius most days. So that's like in the single digits Fahrenheit. Like it was really cold and windy. It was much nicer to sleep in the container, frankly. The science containers have this nice little hole in one side, which makes them basically a fish hut, but you have a little step that you can get closer to the water with. And they have an automatic winch, which you can kind of see to the left of Andy there on the left photo. Andy is there posing with his set of instruments, a microscope and a water sampler, and he deployed them together to about 1,000 meters, 600 meters, something like that. And on the right, we have a cassette, a CTD cassette hanging as well in that container. And this container was really valuable for doing discrete CT deployments as well as ADCP measurements. And Marin, one of our colleagues, had this arm, which you can kind of see on the right, which she deployed through the hole vertically and then cranked it up so that the bottom part of the arm, which had a CT on it, was right underneath the ice, but was away from the influences of the hole itself. So she could get really good measurements from that. It worked really well as long as it wasn't being frozen into the platelet ice. Part of the reason that we were at this location was because of something called supercooling. And supercooling is what happens when water that's been comes out from underneath the ice shelf and it's coming up it's getting less pressurized. So it's actually below its in situ freezing point when it comes out here. And so it's primed to snap freeze. And so that's where you get these big platelets, platelet ice on the right, which is being shown there. And that's actually a huge piece. Typically they're a bit smaller than that, but you get them everywhere and you're constantly using scoops like the one kind of shown on that's sitting in the water there. You're constantly using scoops to scoop out platelet ice so that you're not refreezing your hole. And on the right is them actually melting out the hole and dragging these giant blocks out of the container. It was a huge process to melt that hole. Third site we did actually this year, near field site, was right off of Scott Base. We did some bathymetric work for their rebuild project. And so we deployed the vehicle in a square pattern, like a lawnmower pattern, and actually did a bathymetric survey underneath right off of Pram Point in order to figure out if there were any hazards for an incoming boat. And so we got to deploy out of containers here as well, which was really quite nice. And the commute was great. Just walk over the pressure ridges and you were basically right there. So that was really cool. All right, so lastly, I'll talk about the deep field work that we do and kind of what that looks like. Deep field work in Antarctica is pretty unique, even by Antarctic standards, frankly. This image here is actually our camp from this past year. It's not particularly high quality because we were on a plane as we were leaving the camp, and I took it on my phone, so it's apologies for that. But you can see that it's kind of a little bit spread out, and there's only a few tents, and there's a whole lot of white all around you. Very isolated. So just a reminder of where we are. I'm going to be talking about the KISS camp here, KIS-2 camp. KIS-1 is right next to KISS-2, so they were very similar, and I'll kind of be talking about them interchangeably. The Thwaites camp all the way on the right, I don't have any images of, and I wasn't there, so I don't feel super qualified to talk about it, but you can imagine that it was somewhat similar as well in some cases. It's about 1,000 kilometers out to KISS-2 and about 2,000 kilometers out to Thwaites, and it's about 4,000 kilometers back to Christchurch, to give you a sense of scale there. And so this was the main mess tent, and this is the KISS field team. So this is Brittany, myself, Enrica, and Andy from right to left in front of the Twin Otter plane that flew us out there. And the Twin Otter plane is two-engine propeller plane, really tiny thing, super tiny. So tiny that it was basically the four of us and maybe one other person could have fit, and then all of our gear was behind the photographer gear. So tiny that it had to stop halfway through at a refuel station. There were these big black bladders of fuel just basically sitting in the middle of nowhere, and we landed next to them, and she plugged up a pump to the fuel thing and then refueled. Then we basically took off. It was it's really quite surprising when you see nothing around you and you all of a sudden just start going down. I'm a little bit jarring. And this is what our camp actually looked like from the air when we flew in this year. There was basically nothing because we were the first flight in. So we had to do a lot of the camp setup ourselves, which I'll talk about as well. The other option for flights, so this is from 2019. The other option for flights is this bigger plane called a Basler, which is basically a DC-3, but it's turbocharged. And they carry a lot more gear, about 3 or 4 times as much gear and people as the Twin Otters do. And they don't have to stop. It's quite a nice flight, actually. We get to fly in on one of these in 19. So the first thing you do whenever you get there is you actually set up your tent. It's really important to do that first. I mean, it's beautiful weather now, but Antarctica has a way of not really caring about what you think. So they just, the tents have to go up first. So there are Scott tents, which are the kind of pointy ones, and then there are these mountain tents, which are the smaller ones, or polar domes. I got to stay in a polar dome this year. It was quite nice, very cozy, and really warm, actually, surprisingly warm in there. It retains heat really well. This is what the mess tent looks like on the inside before anything is put away, because we got there so early. The gentleman here in the front who had a mask on needed to have that on for 2 days because they let him go out before his final COVID test. He'd already taken like 4, but they always have a last one, and he'd missed that. So in order to come out, so they made him wear a mask, which was kind of interesting, to say the least. This is what those tents look like without anything on them. We had to actually build a couple of these. They're called rack tents. They're really nice. Each section comes in its own dedicated box, and then everything just like slots together. And then you toss the top over, toss the canvas outer over the top, and then cinch it down. It goes together really, really fast. Like this was half a day's work pretty much to put this one together. There are also these tents called polar havens. Oddly enough, these are much more difficult to put together and much more kind of a pain. Same concept pretty much, but they use thinner ribs, but a lot more of a pain. This was for our cold storage. And then there's a big version of this tent, which we used as our drill tent. And this is a giant polar haven. It's like 20 feet across, 25 feet across, 25 feet high. They're typically used in military applications as like portable tents, but it works really, really well for a drill setup here, which we'll see in a minute. So while we were building these tents, we also built a freezer. So this is Andy starting digging out some stuff, some snow, and then later on when he could actually stand in it. This freezer was had about a 2.5 meter, 2 meter tall ceiling from the top of the ice to the bottom of the ice. And then you could see him standing there. It was probably 2.5 meters of actual freestanding room. And it stayed pretty constant at minus 25 Celsius. And you need a freezer out there because the sun actually has a tendency to melt things. So things don't stay frozen if they're just sitting outside. Even if you bury them in a little bit of snow, they have a tendency not to stay frozen because the temperature fluctuates too much. So you really have to put them down underneath. It's really actually quite important. And so this is kind of what camp looks like. It's not a great photo, but this is kind of what camp looks like, or one direction of camp. Once it's all set up, there's the big tents, the home tents, house tents off to the right in the far back. You've got this near small yellow tent, that's the science tent. The far one is the mess tent, and the one on the left is that cold storage I was talking about before. There's some green stuff in the middle, there's a green container there. That's going to be the staff room. That's where the staff stay. There are 3 staff members who kind of manage the camp. They stay there. And then there's a blue warm store tent, container right in the middle as well. And all of this stuff actually gets dragged out in a traverse from Scott Base over the course of about 2.5 weeks earlier in the season. So it's a long project. And then a lot of it gets dragged back as well at the end of the season. And in the other direction, this is what the drill tent looks like when it's got its cover on it. And on the right, we have our small Arctic oven, which is where we deploy out of. Excuse me. The drill tent has all of the stuff for the hot water drill, which I'll talk about in a little bit here. But you can see on the left, there are all those big generators. Those are required for the drill as well. And here's another image of it with a bit of a snow structure. We built a small little outhouse in the corner there, which was quite funny and very entertaining. Fun to do. It's fun to build things out of the snow there because it's nice and compact, so you can really build these cool structures out of it. And while we're there, we also do more science talks. So this is Hugh explaining to us why we are in the middle of nowhere in Antarctica, because the CAM ice stream has stopped for reasons that are not entirely clear. And in this past season, we were drilling into a subglacial channel in order to understand the dynamics of that channel a little bit better and why maybe that had caused the stoppage in CAM. Some of the fun things about doing field work, any kind of field work, are the old pieces of technology and unexpected problems that you have. So on the left, we have one of the earliest laptops, or field laptops, that Hugh used in his PhD. It's still running Windows XP, and it still works. It still runs the radar system that he operates it with, so he still brings it along, even though it's very old and basically has no way of being fixed if it breaks. And on the right, you see that our plug converters, because we had American plugs and they had Kiwi plugs, our plug converters were square. They needed circles, but these are the small things that you don't necessarily think about when you're doing field work. So interesting problems to have. This is what the kitchen looked like. This is from 2019. So this is Lana cooking. You can see we have a full range, full oven, whole suite of pots and pans. We have some actual running water that's snow melt, comes from some pumps in the back that I didn't take any photos of. And there's a pretty serious system of trash and recycling separation as well. And we did not eat, that's for sure. On the left, beef Wellington. Lance specifically got steaks and puff pastry to make beef Wellington with, and he handmade all of these delicious pastries pretty much on the daily. And for Christmas, we had an entire leg of lamb. This is Lance here, or a leg of ham that he roasted and cut up. It was quite lovely. And we got a whole little dining experience out of it, even with I'm Jewish, so I've never had this experience before, but the little paper crowns and the popper things, never heard of these before, but that was kind of a new experience as well. So that was fun. I did some laundry. You actually freeze dry all of your stuff out here because it's so dry, it'll all freeze, and then the surrounding air will literally just wick all of the wet out of it. And it'll become this super soft all over again after a few days. So you just let it freeze. It was really quite remarkable. There's also a shower, primitive perhaps, but there's a huge amount of water for the hot water drills. So actually they used a lot of that hot water to allow people to take showers because you're out there for a while. So it's nice to be able to do things like that. And when you're bored, you end up digging a lot. So this is Matt with a snow saw digging away. And this is a slippery sled. I can't tell who that is exactly, but two people dragging a slippery sled away. And when you're done digging, sometimes you end up with a bar. So this is the under the snow bar or ice bar that we called it, complete with an actual bar that you could walk behind, and it fit the entire camp in it pretty comfortably. So this is pretty cool. This is something you do when you're kind of waiting around for stuff to happen in the deep snow. So this is what the inside of the drill tent actually looks like. On the left, working my way from left to right, on the far left, you have that reel of hose, that black hose. That's where the water actually goes through. Kind of in the back towards the middle, you have all of the boilers. That's obviously what heats all of the water. And then on the right here, you have the drill mast, and that's the hose goes up and then slowly is lowered down into the hole. Basically, you can think of it as a giant pressure washer. It's a lot of what it is. Detail of the mast on the left, and that's the end of the hose. And on the end of that hose goes one of these lances. They're called lances on the right. They basically spray water in a specific pattern. The one on the left just sprays it straight down, and the one on the right is a Christmas tree. It helps to it's used to widen out the hole. And then finally, the final part of this is the flubber. This is all the water I was talking about. You need like 1,000 gallons or so to actually get started, because you need to drill deep enough so you get through all of the air until you puncture through the water, and then you put a pump where the water sits right below the water line, and the pump then recirculates water, so you don't need to continuously be digging out snow. And this is Iceman looking down the hole. This is kind of a terrifying photo. That hole goes down about 500 or 600 meters right there. And it's basically the diameter of Iceman, frankly. It's basically the diameter. And so you can see that we lifted it up and slowly lowered it down very carefully. And this is Peter managing the fiber again, because again, you always need somebody managing the fiber. The fiber is very critical. And you can see there's a little bit of light at the bottom of the hole. That's actually Icefin's rear light on. So you can see it's probably, I don't know, 30 meters down or so. And this is what it looks like at the top side for our base station. This is us just operating the vehicle out there. I don't remember exactly when this was from, but this same kind of situation. And this is Icefin after a dive. You can see that it got pulled up through about 60 meters of free space of air. And so all of the water drips down, and then it's so cold in that cavity that it actually freezes. And so you end up with these long icicles, which look really bizarre when it's sitting down horizontally again. They're just like jutting out front, which is really kind of cool. But once you've done that a couple of times, your field season is slowly coming to an end. You have to go out and dig up all the other stuff that you did. So we also did some we had some seismic instruments out as well. So we had to go and dig all of those out. And you can see here, this is actually not the instrument, it's the control box. The instrument is buried another 10 meters to the left here, and it's completely buried under snow. And we did a lot of digging to pull those guys out. So that was fun. We also do some water sampling, which is what you see on the right for Brittany. And Andy here is holding the tubing for our noble gas sampling as well. You sample it into these thin copper tubes, very specific copper tubes, and then clamp them on both sides. It's actually kind of a tricky process to get exactly right. So we'll see how that goes when we give those to Hui later this year. And then finally, we do all of our DNA filtering in station as well, or in camp as well, because the samples, the water samples themselves need to be filtered as quickly as possible, like within 12 hours of actually sampling, lest anything die in them. So you sample all of it, or you filter all of it as quickly as possible through a Ceravix filter, and then freeze those so you can transport those home and then do processing on them later. Once all of your stuff is done, it's actually pretty remarkable. Your time at camp ends very rapidly because you're kind of in this position where you're like, okay, I'm about to leave, all my stuff's packed, but is the plane going to come? Is it not going to come? No one knows. And then all of a sudden the plane is there. And so you either jump into this, jump into a Twinno with a whole bunch of other people and basically no gear, or you jump into a Basler with all of your gear and basically nobody. And then you fly away and you're done with deep field work. It's a very sudden end to something that's very kind of dramatic the whole time. And this is us kind of just basically landing back near McMurdo and near Scott Base. And once you're back, you do as much packing as you can. And then typically we like to go for hikes, kind of a relaxing way to end the season. So we did a hike in 2019 to this place called Castle Rock, which gives you these really lovely views of Erebus and of the surrounding area. And if you're like me, you boldly get somebody to shave your beard. Didn't go as well as I hoped. But it was fun, and you kind of try to enjoy the last couple of days because you're typically only on station for a few days. They basically kick scientists off station as soon as possible once they're back because bored scientist is no good for anybody. So, and once you get kicked off, you end up back on a Herc. So the C-17s are wheeled vehicles, so they can only come early in the season when the ice is really firm. Later on, they need skied planes. So you can see in the front here, there's instead of a wheel, there's that big ski. This is a LC-130 or Hercules that have these skied planes. Pretty cool. And then finally, you land back in Christchurch for your first sunset of the last 6 months or 4 months or however long it's been, because the sun is up 24 hours a day for the entire duration of your time down there. So all of a sudden it becomes dark and it's a very strange feeling. Typically you go to sleep immediately when it becomes dark. We had a tendency, we went to a movie and all of us would be asleep before the movie actually started because it was dark in the theater. Very funny. You also have a tendency to enjoy some fresh food that you haven't had in a while, such as mussels or Indian food. And Christchurch actually has a phenomenal botanic gardens. If you're ever in Christchurch for whatever reason, highly recommend going. But it's a really lovely experience. It's the first time you see green as well in the last couple of months, because there's no green down in Antarctica of pretty much any sort, except for occasional bagged lettuce. And then when you're done, you fly home. And some acknowledgements. That's kind of what a field season would be like. It's a bit of a whirlwind. I know the presentation was a bit of a whirlwind, and that's kind of intentional because field seasons are kind of like that. There's a lot going on and they happen really fast. So hope that was kind of entertaining. This is obviously this Iceland group PI'd by Dr. Schmidt and Matt Meister. Huge shout out to Antarctica, New Zealand, and NSF and USAP and the British Antarctic Survey for all of their stuff, all of their support in all of this, and all the staff from McMurdo and Scott Bay. It's really awesome. And with that, I will leave you with this lovely photo, 2 photos of a seal that visited us in one of our holes, and a very on point saying for Antarctica. The LC-130s are broken very frequently, so, and everything is often up in the air. And with that, I will take questions or comments.
Wow, Ben, that was really, you brought us with you. It was just at the right detail that we felt we were traveling with you in Antarctica.
Cool.
Totally cool. Well, guys, we are out of time, but this is not meant to be a formal thing. So you can stay as much as you want, and we can chat with Ben and ask some questions. I will have to leave in 5 minutes because I'm hosting a lab party tonight, and I do have to go get groceries. But other than that, I'm going to stay here and leave this open. So go ahead.
Hey, Ben, it's Abby. Good job.
All right, thanks.
You said there's no green, so maybe that's why the Scott base or whatever is all green.
Good point. Yeah, maybe they decided they really needed to liven it up a little bit. That would make sense, frankly.
You said that McMurdo and the Scott base were about 1.5 kilometers apart, and it's a nice walk on a good year. What does a bad year look like?
Good day.
Or a good day.
Yeah, a good day is nice and sunny and not too windy.